All right, and let's kick it off. So, without further ado, today blueprint for regulator aligned AI in anti-money laundering. Want to really emphasize that this is regulator aligned AI. So, this is not a just how to buy any AI, how to implement any AI. This is how do you implement AI in a way that helps your institution, but also that regulators approve of. So really excited to introduce our panelists today, Brandy Reynolds, who's Chief Compliance Officer of World Liberty Financial. And before kind of going into the digital asset space in-house, spent decades in financial services and in consulting at Bates Groups, has a wide range of experience. And David Lee, who's VP and Global Head of Sanctions and Interdictions Strategy at Western Union, and before that was at Payoneer and also at the United Nations and State Department. So we have a really excellent panel for you today, and then myself, co-founder and CEO of Castellum AI, ex-Treasury, ex-banking, and now helping clients, specifically banks and fintechs, implement AI and get really excellent results. So for those of you that have questions, drop them into the chat. We will leave some time at the end. Please pepper us with questions. We'll leave time at the end, but also, your questions may fit into something that we're talking and we'll work to answer them. So, we're going to dive right in. And, in terms of context, I think the first question is why regulators are now signaling that standing still on AI and AML is no longer allowed. I think there was a position earlier during the Biden administration, which was very cautious on AI. Also, the technology was not what it is today. Now regulators are saying not just verbally, but in written guidance and expectations that they expect financial services to be using AI. So, David, as former government official, want to go to you first. What does this mean for screening programs? We've seen signals from the Fed, FDIC, OCC, all are creating very clear expectations around adoption.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's really great to be here and very happy to be joining Brandy and having this fireside chat with y'all. So much appreciated. Let me just take a quick stab at that question. As a former government official for nearly 20 years, having worked as an internal auditor, controller in the National Budget Office, as a diplomat, and a national security analyst, historically, I think many can attest to on this call as well, governments, including the US, has not been really technology forward minded. We're always very cautious when we're in government to any kind of technological changes, especially when we approach watershed moments like we have in the AI context, given LLM's capabilities that we're only scratching the surface on. That all said, not only is agentic AI now the theme that is running through all the C-suites across the world, the technology has been proven literally on the battlefield to offices and operations rooms that it can actually deliver much more higher quality, consistent, reliable, and lower cost options that delivers the services that are so important. And I think there's a greater need to be able to generate extremely comprehensive analyses in very short amounts of time with very limited information, especially when you're in the sanctions compliance world or any other kind of compliance operations that must be running in real time to review customers and transactions. The level of accuracy and timeliness is absolutely essential, not only for you to be able to protect your company and prevent illicit actors from uh, utilizing your products and services, but as a competitive advantage against others in your industry and sector, you have to stay at the top of your game. I think LLM technology has been proven, including a recent FRB study that show that it outperforms dramatically traditional approaches through fuzzy logic matching, and other kinds of search core algorithms that are being widely used in the screening systems that we all, as practitioners, employ today. And I think the regulators having accepted that and understanding the value proposition, that we can move on from basic types of compliance activities to higher echelon types of intellectually driven due diligence activities, that is a better use of our time, that will be more effective, and therefore better enable the financial system to protect against national security threats, is I think what's happened in the last year or two. Let me stop there.
David, that's perfect. And Brandon, you spent a ton of time working with hundreds of different clients. I know you've probably seen a very interesting like inflection before going in-house at WLF, but I like David said, there's historically been this paradigm of, oh, we just accept that there's going to be a ton of false positives, that we're going to miss things. And it seems like the approach from regulators right now is, no, 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 you have a tool that can fix this.
Yeah, no, and it's very interesting because in my career, I have been able to see the vast difference from your startup companies that are, using very manual controls and processes to, very complex models that have, a lot of money, time and attention behind them. And I think, also right now we're in the past, I would say, year to 2 years, you're seeing a lot more communication between industry and regulators. And I think that part of that is helping regulators to see what is out there and how it's being used by some of the top players in the field. From my perspective, I see the comments that we're seeing from the regulators is being really saying that not adopting this is as much of a risk. And so they're going to put emphasis on the technology is there, and so you must use it. So no more manual controls are going to be, acceptable. It's that you have to figure out how to adopt it and also not just adopt it, but understand how it's being used. So you have to be able to speak to what's behind the scenes of the technology, which I think is also a little difficult for some
Yeah.
compliance officers as well. Speaking from experience in the field, it's it is a lot of information that you have to take in and to be able to be well versed in. So I think there's a lot right now happening in the field, but the regulators coming out with their statements, at least it's helping, I think, the industry knowing what at least the playbook is.
And it's not just anyone, right? It's the FDIC and OCC heads.
Right.
So it's not like a state regulator. These are national regulators, and I think we're seeing state and local regulators and examiners also lining up behind that approach pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And what I've seen also is not just on the examination side, but it's also at the forefront of the application process, for many of these regulators. So it's starting to set the stage in the application process of understanding what those controls will be. And then with a fast follow-up during, pre-examinations and exams going forward of, well, you said that you have all these great things during the application process. Now do you actually have them operationalized and are you understanding how they work?
And
Oh,
and to
if I could
both of
just
you, like,
add,
yeah, no, no, David, fire
the,
away.
the great city and state of New York, right? Your backdrop, the acting commissioner for NYDFS recently pronounced something very similar as well,
Yeah.
that we should be adopting advanced technologies, AI in particular. So there's, I think, even at the state level, not all states are created equal from a regulatory compliance perspective. It is something that we're starting to hear as well.
And for both of you, like, what does regulator aligned KYC and screening mean in practice?
To me, I think regulator aligned, I mean, it can mean a lot. And I think that's part of the problem too, historically, is that it's not very well defined. I've been on the giving and receiving side of independent reviews and exams from both the federal and the state level. And to me, it's everything being risk-based. It's being, very well documented and tailored to your business model. And it's the process of, then operationalizing those different controls in a way that is auditable, and that you can articulate how the information works and comes together. So to me, that's what I see. I love, David, your perspective on that from you wearing a different hat and coming at it from a different lens historically as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll start off by noting that, as a sanctions officer, uh, but also if you're an FIU lead or you're leading compliance technologies and what have you, whether it's the OCC or NYDFS, there are very strict requirements for implementing a proper model risk management approach for the various screening and filter management processes that you rely so heavily on. So whether that's sanctions or KYC screening activities, transaction monitoring frameworks, etc. And there are similar provisions even touching on cybersecurity and whatnot. Properly designing, maintaining, testing and tuning, and ensuring that the models are working well in not just from your purview as a second line leader, but also being externally validated, not just through your third line, but through fourth line external validation, I think equally applies in the AI context. Whether you're using an LLM-driven search core engine or an AI agent as a replacement for much of your L1 manual screening operations team, those are basically models. And as models, they need to be properly designed, maintained, and tested and tuned on a regular basis to ensure that you're always able to reliably obtain the outcomes or outputs really that you expect and need to ensure that you're going to meet your regulatory obligations. And so from that vantage point, I think a lot of the traditional practices employed to comply with OCC 1116 or NYDFS 504 sub 3 section obligations, I think should just be equally applied in the AI context. I know that some of the earlier adopters at banks and whatnot have had to take a much more hand-holding approach with their regulators to walk them through everything step by step. And in essence, prove to them from the inside that these models work. I think as Peter noted, though, a lot of things have happened in the last couple of years. And so maybe that kind of handholding is not as necessary anymore, but rather properly documenting and in essence running a robust process that you can be proud about and that you are actually relying on to improve your screening and accuracy is, I think, the name of the game here.
And I want to just jump in here and show one thing with David. You mentioned this at the beginning of the call, but this is a paper from the Federal Reserve. For those of you that have not read this, can LLMs improve sanctions screening the financial system? The short answer is yes. But I think what's pretty cool is that the Fed is publishing and regulators are now really actively looking at how the regulated can take aggressive steps to improve their program using new technology. I think traditionally we've seen regulators be a lot more defensive. Like, hey, let's make sure you don't adopt anything that hasn't been tested, doesn't have a very kind of a large body of evidence behind it, because let's say one uh large bank in US changing a model that doesn't work could affect tens of millions of people. But the technology is such a game changer, and criminals are so active in using LLMs to defraud and scam and commit sanctions evasion that regulators have decided, you know what, we need to support this. And so, Brandon, what are you seeing in terms of like the shift from fragmented workflows of multiple solutions to consolidated AI-driven screening and decisioning?
So I think it's starting to help where you can get rid of a lot of the noise that you would have had otherwise. And so you can actually focus your time and attention to what matters the most. And I think, if you look back historically also where you had, the trend going into the New York 504 and that becoming almost like a de facto, kind of, this is the best practices approach where it was just, implement your technology, you've got your controls in place, then you just test it, manage it, and so forth. What has led to, though, is a lot of alerts that are being, in my opinion, mismanaged. It also leads to a lot of unnecessary SAR filings. And so when you do adopt AI and you can fold that in, then what you're doing is you're allowing your team to be able to actually focus on what's meaningful. And instead of having a lot of quantity, you actually have quality that you're being able to focus your time and attention to, which is kind of the basis of that risk-based approach, where you want to actually focus your efforts. And so I see that being a game changer. But also, it still goes back to the quality of the information that you're looking at. And so that's a whole nother, issue as far as just, looking at data integrity. And so implementing, any of these, models, still goes back to it's working from whatever your data points are from the very beginning.
David, anything you want to add on to that? We have plenty to talk about, so we can also keep moving.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do. I always do. I like to talk. But just to chime in quickly on that point, 100% support what Brandy noted. If I can just kind of build on that to add an additional point, as operators and even second line, leaders in a company trying to oversee compliance operations, I think we can all agree that ultimately the purpose of our companies are to generate revenue and profit, right? We are, for the most part, private sector organizations. We have shareholders if we're public companies, etc. So the business imperative cannot be ignored by any means,
Yeah.
right? We're here to enable a business that is compliant, right? I think that's really important to focus on here. That if you're coming in from a compliance only or a compliance above everything else mindset, it's although as a former government official, it's a little hard to say this, but I'm just going to be realistic here.
Yeah.
That's just not going to allow you to compete competitively in the field, and your company will not be around for very long, to be frank with you. And so I think OFAC and FinCEN and other regulators have all
David, I feel like you're looking at me very directly. You're like, Peter, you're not gonna be around for a while. But
but quite the opposite
no,
anyway.
I'm just busting your chops. But I think what David said is exactly correct. No, on the compliance side, we're often seen as, unfortunately, sometimes blockers. I mean, the best
Yeah.
compliance officers are enablers, but yeah, if a compliance officer at a different organization figures out a way to uh, one, cut costs on existing screening without losing accuracy, the emphasis without losing accuracy, they're going to be much higher favored in that organization. That organization is going to be able to compete faster, get more business, and then uh, two, the organization will be able to actually expand not just their business faster, but also their screening. Like we know some organizations, for example, that have not been screening adverse media even though they know they should, because their approach has been, look, we're overwhelmed with our sanctions and law enforcement most want alerts,
Yeah.
and we just don't have the human staffing. And so they end up in situations where they would rather not be, just to kind of give further details, because they are not doing adverse media screening because the executives did not approve a budget for the humans that would be required to review those alerts. Well, now you can do that screening without needing to add like 50 staffers to review those alerts.
And I've
Precisely.
been on, I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
No, please, I'll come back around after you.
Yeah, I was
Please.
just going to say, so I've seen throughout my career as well, especially on the consulting side with clients, and that is the fear is that more information will get them in trouble as opposed to enhancing and helping them be more compliant. Because the theory is that if you have the information, you need to do something with it, from a compliance perspective and a risk profile. And so having the negative news, having the additional information, having more alerts that may be low risk, but kind of still feed into it, it almost is better in their minds to turn everything off that you absolutely do not have a strict requirement to look at, as opposed to having it and then a regulator asking, well, you had this information, you did nothing with it. And so I see that a lot in the industry.
Totally, see no evil, hear no evil,
Yeah.
then then you can progress, without a guilty mindset. And regulators have been very well known to really slam. Sorry, I'm just suffering from allergies, so a little congested. Regulators have been known to really slam institutions and issue consent orders, or even worse, when they are found to have huge backlogs of unresolved screening or transaction monitoring alerts, and beyond. And so you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, in order to be compliant, unless you're confident that you can actually get to the end and accomplish everything as expected, both internally to meet your business requirements within your resource constraints and regulatory expectations and obligations. So the point I was trying to drive towards is we all have finite resources that we can access. When our companies get crunched from a revenue perspective, they go through a cost-cutting exercise. A lot of things that we may be working on are going to be put on the chopping block to be tightened as much as possible to get to the bare minimum. And even for institutions that are going through a major remediation effort, they don't get unlimited resources either. They
Yeah.
still have to make
Yep.
a very strong business case, not a compliance case, a business case for why this is actually a worthwhile investment. And so ultimately, if we're able to reduce the amount of wasted time and energy going through false positive alerts, and we can actually have a more streamlined workforce and an operating process that can focus on likely true matches, and then have the residual capacity that is provided by having a highly accurate, less noisy system that then gives you the ability to now go beyond just determining if it's a true match. Now, maybe you have the additional resources and capabilities to conduct wider scoping investigations with your FIU partners. Maybe you can actually go back and revisit the KYC files of other customers that seem to match up with the profile of the transactions and whatnot that initially triggered your attention to. And so in that regard, it's really about like going up the hierarchy of like the hierarchy of needs that Maslow talked about, from just getting through survival to then
Yep.
actually being able to better fulfill, your self-actualization, I guess, approach, whatever that was called. And I think in that regard, that's what I think these leaders are calling for, even from the key regulatory agencies that you mentioned, Peter. And I'll just end with this note. If I can reduce my false positive rate without sacrificing my false negative rate, that's a win-win situation. New technologies, LLM-driven AI capabilities, however you deploy it, and it matters how you deploy it, can give you that win-win solution, and that's huge.
And for everyone that did not think they were gonna hear about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, um, you have, and it's entirely relevant. So, um, yeah, they just the old bargain, the unspoken bargain between regulators and the regulated is now over, right? There are tools that allow you to actually see everything that is of high value, and to there is no longer an excuse, for example, for anyone to not file a high value SAR. Um, and regulators know that, and so they're like, hey, let's find, we know where the noise is, you know where the noise is, let's eliminate that, get the results. And so, I will kind of set the context for what has been, what will be, what regulator expectations are. We really need to talk about implementation. So, overlay, integrated, in-house. Um, Brandy, David, how do you two look at this right now? You're both in-house. Both of you have also kind of worked in roles where you've seen other organizations implement this. What are the trade-offs?
So I'm glad to go first on this. So I have seen every combination that you can imagine. And so one thing that I'll note is that there's an approach that you have to take to really figure out for your organization what is best. I always see those that want to build in-house woefully underestimate what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah,
So it's not necessarily on.
very, very polite of you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's always good intentions. And I think from my experience, it starts out well. And then it's the now what that a lot of time trips up those teams, right? Building it out. So it's the maintenance of it, it's keeping up, it's the governance, it's the change management. There's a lot that can go into after you just get the initial framework. You also, I see that's where, sometimes we'll build in-house after we've tried, a vendor or two, or we have disjointed systems already. And so there's already a data integrity issue. It could be also there's data coming in from different directions that maybe it's not in the same formatting, and so it creates a huge problem. I think though that's going to be an issue no matter if you build yourself in house or if you utilize an overlay or a vendor to really to go that route. From my experience, I have seen that a lot of times it's very hard to for an engineering or a product team to want to utilize a vendor because they know they can do it themselves. They can do it in-house. They want to be able to utilize the skills and to be able to, make something happen, right? However, from my perspective, from a risk and compliance officer, I like the ability of having a company that has the expertise and they're dedicated and they're focused on that one thing and they can do it right and they can maintain it and they can keep it up. And so there's always a trade-off. And for me, is that, are you going to be able to maintain it with the resources you have in-house as opposed to relying on the vendor? But there is still a certain amount of trust factor that goes with a vendor. And I see oftentimes people trip up on the fact that they want to overly trust a vendor. They're not wanting to test, you have proper controls in place or ensure that there is, the model validation system testing of those vendors. So I'll pause there.
In no, David, fire away.
No, no, no. What were we gonna say, Peter?
I was just gonna say that there's, we work with some very large tech companies, have a lot of engineers, and I mean, there's often an initiative to like, hey, we should just build it ourselves. And an organization might look, and I'm not saying that's the wrong answer, to be clear. Uh, but it's often seen as, okay, we might need to pay an external AI vendor, let's say 200K a year for this product. Maybe as much as like 300, 400, 500K. Well, why don't we just build this ourselves? And the question that I always ask is just, if this is a financial decision, like, is this a financial decision, or is it a you prefer to keep your tech stack internal decision? Because if it's a financial decision, I'm just going to make this very brief because it's very simple math. Generally, one and a half talented engineers that are going to be working on that are already going to cost more than what you'd pay a vendor that focuses exclusively on this. And oftentimes, clients are looking at what is the startup cost of this, but they're not looking at the maintenance cost. And the advantage of course, working with a vendor that specializes in this is they're beholden to you. Internal employees, they're going to be beholden to the entire company. They might get reorged, moved around, and so you have really a lot of problems there. So kind of, I think doing it for a financial reason is never a good one. If it's kind of, hey, we want to keep internal tech stack, our engineers already know this, that's a different story. But I wanted to um also just flag uh this resource that we have.
Are you bringing up your yeah.
Yes, guide here. So, guide to agentic alert resolution. And just to be clear, folks, by the way, it doesn't say by Castellum, but I want to go to chapter 6, page 21. And I just want to, I think I put it in the chat, page 6, no, chapter 6, page 21. If you are missing, you don't know what to do for beach reading, we have you covered for at least a couple hours. But you can see here kind of generally current state versus AI state, but back to where in-house development makes sense and where it doesn't. So chapter 6, implementation pathways. And David, take it away. I just wanted to flag this for the audience. But David, back to you.
Yeah. Not a promotion by any means, but I did look at it at some point. I thought the logic, the analytical approach employed in that document is actually pretty helpful in terms of guiding your thought process. So to kind of come back and answer the question here, and I totally agree with what Brandy said. It is a issue that depends. It depends. That's the first answer, right? And secondly, you have to assess this on multiple spectra. So ultimately, how you design your compliance screening system, let's just talk about screening, right? Sanctions, PEP, and negative news at best, but compliance screening. How you design that, as you've noted, can be fully in-house built, could be leveraging external capability for certain nodes or junctures, or it could be fully outsourced end to end, etc. And there's even additional variations and, combinations and permutations within that. But I think the real question is going to be depending on the following factors, in my view. First of all, your assessment of the approach should obviously start from a financial perspective, but that cannot be the only dimension by any means. Because as we talked about before, you need to be able to explain your model. You need to be able to actually test and tune it and manage it. in a sustainable fashion over presumably several years, if not decades even. And you need to make sure that the outputs that are coming out are not only comporting with regulatory expectations and obligations, but actually support you in enabling the business. So when you look at it from that vantage point, what does it take? It really is a business case here, right? You have to look at this as a programmatic manager, a line function, and not as a compliance officer. And this is where my business training and my OMB days really helps me a lot. It's actually a lot of stuff that I do that's not sanctions related by any means. I'm looking at ATL,
Yeah.
ETL, screening workforce management, IT sustainment, technological fixes, managing the queuing and programming of different fixes that I need our development side to execute so I can keep those systems running, account for business product changes, market, releases and all that. It really is a business function that we're fulfilling under the guise of a second line compliance leader. And so when you're looking at it from that vantage point, cost is one critical component, but manpower or human power, I should not be using that, human power or people power requirements are also very, very critical, right? Can you, as your institution, sustainably recruit and retain the kinds of people that you need to actually keep these systems and processes running? And that's going to vary depending on the institution that you're working for. Is your technical
And David,
workforce?
sorry, can you just go a little more into kind of when you say the kind of people, like who are we talking about? What is
Yeah,
this?
yeah. No, I'll get there. It is coming
Yeah.
in a minute, but I appreciate the prompt. Um, in terms of the people, right? Do we have the right technical developers who can actually design a new system or even be able to properly integrate a third-party vendor provided solution and then be able to make any changes that are on your side of the ledger beyond what the systems provider that the vendor is giving you is gonna offer you. And then there's the operating staff of actually reviewing the alerts that come out. And then the second line overseers who are watching that from a L3 perspective, from a compliance systems and analytics or technology perspective, to actually sanctions advisory teams and investigative teams that want to go back and make sure that any kind of system-driven violations or aberrations from policy are going to be remediated and addressed to prevent those issues from occurring in the future. So it takes a village here, right? And I can drill down even further in a minute, but what I wanted to just lay out were the kind of key factors to consider and then how to analyze that depending on your vantage point. So I think cost, the kind of people resources you need from developers to project managers to sanctions, second line sanctions, policy officials to first line operating staff, QC/QA individuals, um, and there's a lot more.
It's
But I
like that
think
you're describing a whole company.
I am, but that's what it
Yeah.
takes, right? It takes a
Yeah.
village to get this done. And then you have to think about your model risk management, right? Can you actually create an end-to-end mapping that's documented that you can reproduce every year to be able to validate and self-certify and be able to withstand third line and fourth line scrutiny as audits and exams come through periodically. And ultimately, you need to be able to justify to your business partners why the friction that you're going to be introducing into customer onboarding or your transaction screening requirements as payments or banking transactions or whatever else is happening, crypto transactions are occurring, is a necessary evil that we must accept and account into the business planning process. Requires all of this to be done. Now, I worked at Circle as my first private sector job out of the State Department for 2 years. And I think people know it's the issuer of USDC. It attracted some of the best Silicon Valley and Boston-based tech people who are at the top of the game around the world. I did not have any issues finding engineers and project product managers within the company to be able to build whatever we wanted. And I know that larger tech companies, I don't want to name them, but I think we all know who the big players are in the field. They have that kind of cutting edge tech and product management teams that the Metas and the Googles and now the AI companies all have. If you're one of those companies, building in-house may not be actually a major problem because there's already a very robust technical and product management architecture, infrastructure, and people, and a pipeline that constantly brings them in so that you can rely on that, and you would just be one of the many, many stakeholders and requesters of services that will be delivered by this amazing technical and
And
product
David,
staff.
sorry to jump in here, but I think Brandy, like you're um how are you approaching this if you're allowed to talk about it?
Yeah, so right now, so we're approaching it with outsourced. So we're not building. So we're using vendors for our approach. So that was kind of the decision that we went through. It was very similar kind of your process, David, that you're speaking of, what makes sense for us for where we are today. And so that's where we came to not build in-house. One thing that I do, I just want to add on because to your point, David, you having the right people, but one point that I wanted to add in here about having the right people, sometimes it's also about do those people speak the same language? And I don't mean like English specifically. I mean, sometimes it's hard for the compliance team to have an interpreter with the engineers or the engineers to be able to understand compliance speak without someone in the middle. And so many, small companies or are those that are not these large tech companies with, like a project management team and so forth, they really struggle because sometimes compliance, they know their stuff, but they're not sure how to relay to the engineers how you actually build this out or what goes into it. And so I've seen some failures just simply because the people aren't speaking the same language.
1,000%. That's kind of where I was trying to go. Even in that situation, when you don't have that ability to be able to have the you know, amazing technical staff, then you have a challenge in terms of actually fulfilling your mission. On the other hand, relying fully on vendors, and I think we can talk about this, Nice Actimize is potentially being sold. Oracle's been going through some difficult challenges. And so a lot of the legacy providers are struggling because of the rise of LLM. And so what I want to get to is depending on what is the best approach for your company should determine which approach you take, whether you take a fully outsourced, fully in-house build, or a hybrid approach, and your ability to attract and retain the right talent, and looking at your institution's history of how well it's been able to internally handle that, I think should be quite instructive in that regard. The two companies I've been at have built in-house systems and ultimately realized that those were really too difficult to maintain and oftentimes just fell short of expectations because they were always building to yesterday's requirements. And so turning to third-party vendors, I think, is really critical. And I'll end on this note. We have hit a watershed moment from a technological perspective. And now, even for companies that may have a highly functioning fuzzy logic-based screening system that has been working very well for the last 5 to 10 years and probably can run another 5, 10 years, the game has changed. And so I think it actually is the right time for you to reassess how your technical architecture looks like and be looking more at third-party source vendors to bring in cutting-edge tech that can be maintained. And that way, you're also leveraging the crowdsourcing training of those AI-driven systems that you're not able to achieve with an in-house built system.
And one thing I just wanted to note there to your point too is that oftentimes I've seen third-party vendors throw out a lot of fun and popular terms like AI machine learning when what that really means to them is fuzzy logic. And so it doesn't go to the next level of what we're maybe talking about here and is actually being able to train the models, being able to actually incorporate more than just the fuzzy logic, but letting the models really be able to learn and take in the decisioning, that maybe requires, someone at a higher level from a human perspective, helping to train that model and being able to take that data back, and be able to enhance the overall system. And so I think that, that's just something to keep in mind also when looking to, build versus buy. Not all buying is necessarily at the same levels.
And thank you both. And we talked a fair amount right now about the kind of build versus buy, but I also want to look at the hybrid approach, which is um, keeping some of what you have internally and buying something that works with your existing systems. And this is because Castellum is modular, and in some cases we come in and we fully replace an existing vendor, or we work with someone that is new to compliance and they buy Castellum for data, screening engine, AI agents, and more. But we have started partnering with a lot of much kind of larger companies that already work in the space, and so we come to uh, client and will say, hey, we know, for example, that you use, let's say, LexisNexis Bridger. Castellum has an integration of LexisNexis Bridger. Do you want our agents in your system? And so that approach is working really well for us. And I recommend to everyone, whichever system you're using, see who integrates it with it already from an agentic perspective, because you would be able to get all of the advantages of what AI agents can do without replacing your screening system, without changing your model, without changing your data source. And I think this is kind of where it's really interesting, because if you are bringing in like a heavyweight agentic system, like let's say a work fusion or something, I would definitely consider that a model. But if you are bringing in an AI agent worker, my take is, and maybe we can get a little spicy here and disagree, but my take is that that is not a model. If you have an agent that is following existing policies and procedures and doing the with the exact same system before, with the same thresholds as before, with the same data as before, but it's just reviewing alerts, helping close those out, that is something that can be adopted very quickly, especially if it integrates into your current system. And I want to just share a specific item from the ebook here. So, and this is the ebook Guide to Agentic Alert Resolution, and want to go to chapter. Yeah, so here you see different pathway comparisons. Embedded, integrated, in-house. Recommendation, again, doesn't say by Castellum, it just, base your decisions on this. But requirements for a successful rollout, we really want to focus here on a couple of items that we'll talk about: model configuration, data workflow, and readiness. And I'll put the link in here again. Brandy, could you talk a little bit about QA, QC, and change management? Because we talked about the regulatory, what the environment has been, where it's going, regulatory expectations, rethinking the screening workflow, buy, build, hybrid. Okay, let's say you've made one of those decisions. How do you ensure that you get the results that you have told the board that you're going to get? Because every single one of these projects generally has or should have an ROI. So how do you make sure you hit that? Because like David said in the beginning, all of us work for businesses, and we need to make sure that as we're buying new products that it works. Sorry, I'll be quiet. Brandy, over to you.
Yeah, no, so you asked some very good questions. And earlier you did mention that compliance is often either a call center or a no department. And being able to show the value add is extremely critical. And so that's something that I've worked with compliance teams historically to be able to figure out, like, how can we show our value, show our worth, that we are actually helping to facilitate the business, as opposed to just it's stifling innovation. And so a couple of things to note here. So you mentioned QA, QC, and change management. One thing that is absolutely critical, it's being able to have compliance embedded in the very early stages of any build out whatsoever. And that would go to the same for if you're doing an overlay or working to integrate any third party as well, because having compliance as an afterthought or saying we've just rolled it out, it's now in a sandbox even, just give a thumbs up and we're live, we're ready to go. That's unacceptable. And so that is a good way to create a lot of problems, and find a lot of issues that can lead to fines, penalties, enforcement actions because there wasn't the proper time to actually to test the system and the controls. And so building out the system with compliance along the way and actually having, even if you're a small team, a very thoughtful quality control, quality assurance process built in. You on the sanction side, it can be as simple as going and looking at list of names or entities, blockchain addresses that are recently removed and added or modified, and actually going old school testing and putting names through and making sure that things work as they're supposed to. Also going forward, the change management, we've seen more and more examiners and auditors ask for the documentation to back up. When are you actually updating the systems? Are you, changing your thresholds or alerts? If so, why? And having that documentation of who made the changes. It's not acceptable to say that you just had, tremendous amount of alerts that you wanted to reduce, you having thoughtful documentation goes a long way with those regulators. So I think those are some things to keep in mind there. But also being able to have some of the metrics that also can kind of complement your
Yeah.
risk assessment. So to me, it's very important to have the qualitative as well as the quantitative data that you can, one, back up for your risk assessment for regulators. So you can see, the number of alerts that are coming through, what you're clearing, what is also the rate of success where you have, X number of alerts, but also looking at that data in or alongside your SAR data as well, if you're required to file suspicious activity reports or STRs. And so that way you can actually look at, is this meaningful for where we are now, or do we need to make adjustments to the system and how it's working? I'll pause there. I'm sure David has a lot to complement to the response or add in.
No, I think that was a bit of a textbook answer. So not a lot of things to add on or try to take a different take on. Wholeheartedly aligned with what Brandy just noted, and it was a very comprehensive response actually. So the only thing I'll add here is kind of at the operational level, right? What does it practically mean? If you're going to install an agent, test it like crazy, run it in parallel processing and be very, very confident that you have all the documentation and audit trail to confirm that it is meeting or exceeding the performance levels achieved by your manual team that has been in place for some time. And be able to show that we are responsibly transitioning from manual reviews to maybe an AI-driven L1 and L2 approach, while still there will be humans in the loop. And three, that the QC/QA framework or the runoff approach for anything that gets bypassed through the AI agent directly from manual review for complicated cases that the agent cannot resolve are all going to be mechanisms that ensure the proper performing of the system and that it'll be sustainably conducted to ensure that there's no model drift and other kinds of issues that may come along post-deployment, even after robust testing on the front end.
One thing that I would like to add there too, it's not a very technical response, but it's garbage in is garbage out. And that's something that I've said for a long time. And so as you're building the AI agents and the models, they're only as good as the information that you utilize to build it or to train it with. And so you have to ensure that you do have competent people that are building, that are contributing to the information that it's going to be trained and modified with.
Yes, if I can add on that on the data side. So we haven't talked about source code engines, right? We're really talking about dispositioning AI layers. In that regard, if your AI agent is a very simple bot that is in essence automating certain basic functions like looking for a date of birth, looking for geolocation indicators and what have you to determine if it's true or false, that's pretty straightforward. And I would probably agree with you, Peter, that's not a model. But if you're actually having a contextual LLM-driven AI agent that is generating context or third-party source data, whether that's OSINT or actually curated risk intelligence data that you're piping in, and it's now actually going through a cognitive process or inference-based logic, that I think is starting to veer into the model land. And that's where I think what Brandy just noted is absolutely essential. You need to know exactly what those agents are going to be absorbing and how they're going to be using that information, and to regularly check in and confirm that they're staying on target in the right approach. We haven't talked about data ingestion and migration for LLM-driven search core engines, but that's a completely separate
Yeah.
problem.
No, both of you excellent answers. Folks, if to the audience, if you have for whatever reason not been paying attention for the last, 50 minutes, I hope you really paid attention during the last 4 minutes when Brandy and David were talking. Two items I want to flag here. One, model drift and stability, which both Brandy and David mentioned. Who in the audience is not familiar with model drift? You can raise your hand or shoot a note, but I'll just say model drift is when uh, your AI agent on day one answers a certain question, like let's say 2 + 2 is 4. On day two, 2 + 2 is 4. And on day 79, 2 + 2 is 5. And so, of course, in the AML KYC space, it's a lot more complex than that. But one answer to that is to conduct regular and consistent stability testing. So if I have a certain sanctions alert, which would be pretty straightforward because it's binary, either you have a match or you don't. You need to conduct some due diligence in many cases, but giving an agent enough information to come to a conclusion that you would want and seeing a testing on a regular basis, and this can be fully automated. And if you're using a vendor, they should be doing this to you, and you should be doing this in procurement. But does the agent answer or does the agent resolve the alert the way that you want it to be resolved every time? Like if you ask, hey, resolve these 100 alerts, these are the answers. That's one pretty straightforward way to check for model drift. It gets more complicated when you get into more investigations and things like that. And what you both mentioned about external data and when that becomes a model. One of the things that when we've talked to clients, they've actually said, hey, are you bringing in external data for this? Or are you just going to make a decision based on the data that we have? Initially, we were like, oh, well, we can, but a lot of folks that we talked to said, no, 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 we don't want you to bring in external data. Then we have to redo the model. We just want you to make a decision based on the data that is available. And so this kind of brings up the next question, which is if you are bringing external data, that brings a differentiation question regarding agents, because everyone can build agents, large companies like Circle, WLF, Stripe, etc. They can all build their own agents. Uh, but there's also, tons of startups and some legacy companies building agents. My strong recommendation is to work with an agentic provider that has their own data because when you're looking at differentiation between AI agents, one, a generic agentic company should not be doing anything AML KYC. But even within AML KYC, a transaction monitoring or SAR filing agent cannot be repurposed to do, let's say, adverse media alert clearing. Like, and when someone says, hey, we have an alert clearing agent, hopefully what they're going to tell you is that they have, a agent that has, 10 to 15 sub agents that perform tasks. Because the more specialized an agent is, the more accurate your results are going to be. So, don't accept a black box AI response from anyone. Don't accept just we have an agent. Don't accept oh, our differentiator is that we have some other big client or that we have these big fundraisers. Really work to understand like how this is different, and ideally the agentic vendor has their own data that they can provide, whether it's sanctions, adverse media, ownership inform, etc. Really push for explanations on testing, explanations on differentiation and integration. And I know we're almost at time, so folks, please throw in your questions uh into the chat, and then for closing remarks, Brandon, David, what's one decision compliance leaders should prioritize when evaluating AI for screening?
I mean, when I would say, do they have the industry expertise too? Because I
Mm.
think that goes a long way. If you're, in TradFi, that's great having a vendor that works specifically in that space. But if you're working or looking at a vendor who has never touched anything in the crypto space, it may not be the right fit because they may not have the right expertise to really have, an appropriate AI agent and the tools in the background needed for your specific business model.
Very, very direct, concise answer. I like it. So, folks,
Ah,
everyone,
I
is
think
your
that's spot
AI
on.
agent vendor, do they have expertise in the space? Sorry, David, over to you.
Yeah, and I'll probably add, if you're using consultants, do your consultants have that expertise too, right? Because a lot of times larger institutions will be employing both a new vendor and consultancy to help with that migration, integration, planning, all that. I would say also assess your capability, or rather assess your requirements and design your RFP in the context of your current processes for KYC data collection. Because if you're not collecting the right type of data to send to an LLM-driven search core engine, or if your AI agent is going to be sitting on an island without additional data, all the capabilities that are being marketed to you may not actually be applicable to you.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you can actually get 100% of what the vendor is providing or offering to then make the case. And so I think it has to be really a very internally, reflective exercise to determine what is the best approach. And it should not be just dollar-wise driven. The operational staff cost cuts are absolutely, convincing and tremendous, but it's all also about ensuring that you have a much more efficient and accurate approach that buys you time and the time of other FCC leaders, whether that's in the FIU space or KYC or et cetera, to do better due diligence on the targets that you're looking at.
Thank you both for those really excellent recommendations. We have a question here. Will this recording be available? Yes, it will. So everyone can watch us at the beach. And with that, I want to give a really huge thank you to our panelists. They're both incredible with tons of experience and lots of really tactical, specific recommendations. Brandy, David, thank you very much. Thank you to all of the attendees. We'll follow up before recording. And again, everyone, please check out the ebook. It has a lot of very specific recommendations, many of which were discussed today. Thank you, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Have a good day.